We are quite sick. We're quite unhealthy. Our families are as disrupted as they've ever been in American history, worse than they've ever been in our country's history. People are growing up increasingly with major dysfunctions. Our culture in the last 20 years, particularly, especially since 2015, has really become effeminized in a really unhealthy way. That's extremely off-putting to men. And you hope they find the church and the confessional churches doing what they're supposed to be doing in living a true Christian life, which there's a robustness. And so they're running to it for that reason. Okay, great. We'll deal with that. We'll take them in. We'll disciple them, and we'll steady them up.
Cheers and welcome back to On the Line. Before we begin today's episode, just want to highlight that the Lenten journey for Memento has in fact begun. It began on February 1st. So we have the daily devotions and all of the disciplines focused during this 63-day period. But to also highlight that if you have not yet joined Memento and you are interested, there are many fraternities. We've got north of 1,000 fraternities throughout the U.S., for instance, and international. There are fraternities that are still looking for men. So if you are still interested in joining, feel free to check out memento70.com, and you can either join our Discord chat or reach out to us, and we would be happy to connect you with a fraternity. So thanks and enjoy the episode. All right. And Bennett says we are live. So welcome back to On the Line. And today we are at New St. Andrews. I think the great farmers market right out here in Moscow is just finishing up. Beautiful little town. And this is also the home of New St. Andrews College.
Yes.
College or university?
College for now.
College for now. Okay. And you guys are doing great things. You're kind of on the forefront of, certainly in connection with like Canon Press and whatnot. You guys are doing great media, of getting and articulating the Christian faith out into the culture. Educationally, you guys are classical. And, we were just talking how that is, there's a great movement of that in the West and America, and that's fantastic. And you are a professor, Dr. David Talcott, you're a professor of philosophy here.
Yes.
So thanks for sitting down. And I don't know if you just want to talk a little bit about kind of your area of focus that you've kind of spent your time writing, teaching about.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. Yeah. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks for coming and visiting our college. We're trying to renew classical education for the 21st century and the educational needs of Christendom for the future. And so, I've been here 2 years. Before that, I taught at the King's College in New York City and lived out there. And my main work is on ancient Greek philosophy, Plato and Aristotle, and that period. But I've also, at small schools, professors teach a range of classes. And so I've also taught a number of other courses and published a number of short pieces on different topics connected to sexual ethics and gender and kind of that whole area, which is obviously an important cultural thing going on right now. So history of philosophy is mostly what I do. That's my bread and butter. And then other courses as needed.
So it's kind of a lead off. What's kind of your read on culture, America, 2025? What's your diagnoses of where things are going awry?
That's a big question. We are quite sick. We're quite unhealthy. The whole online situation is a big problem. People spend a lot more time staring at screens than just face-to-face talking with each other. Our families are as disrupted as they've ever been in American history, worse than they've ever been in our country's history. And so people are growing up increasingly with major dysfunctions of character, just of mind and of soul. And so I think the overall trends are pretty troubling. I don't know of too many trends at the macro level that are really positive. You could say, the divorce rate's going down, which it is, but that's only because the marriage rate's going down even more. And so, the silver linings are tough to find as far as the macro story. At a micro scale, I think there's a lot of reason for hope as more and more people realize how much trouble we're in culturally. And so I think small communities that are taking seriously the call to disciple their children, to create schools and have an educational system for their children where they can grow up in the faith, and a faith that's not just sold out or shallow or superficial, but genuine love of God and genuine Christian character and life. So I think there's lots of little things that are reason for optimism. The classical school movement is one of those. I know a number of young guys, particularly in Reformed denominations, which is my own background at this point, but also I know in Lutheran denominations and other places, there are young men very committed to their confessional identity. And I think that is an extremely positive sign for the future. I think renewed Christian denominations are going to be essential to the renewal of the country, right? There's no virtue, civic virtue without piety. So the renewal of the churches is job number one. That was kind of vague, but
well, we can drill in on some of those. But as you're talking, so why do you think it is? Because we are definitely seeing this in the Lutheran Church, definitely under the age of 35, I would say. But there's a big influx of young men coming back to the church. The numbers don't trend that way quite as strongly for the women, right? So it seems like there's kind of a divide at the younger age where women in general are still, falling a little bit more liberal, both in the way that they would vote, publicly, or even the way that they would align with social issues. Men are very much recoiling against that, and coming back to conservative-based churches. So why do you think that the kind of the Christian message, or even just the recoiling of the secular message, why is that resonating with men?
That's a great question, because you're right. There's a clear trend line now, even just on something simple like voting patterns that you can see. There's definitely something afoot with the young men. I mean, I think our culture in the last 20 years, particularly, especially since 2015 and the rise of the whole woke movement, has really become effeminized in a really unhealthy way. Feminine modes of discourse and relating have become dominant culturally, and that's extremely off-putting to men. Men don't want to live in a feminine dominated space. So I think there's a very strong, aspect to that. They're looking for a different way of life, a better way of life, something where they're not just berated by teachers from kindergarten to 12th grade and told that it's a problem that they're a man. They need to emote and relate to people like women do, preferably middle-aged women who run the schools. And, 12 years of that's a lot to put up with. And by the time you get through that, you're like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to do that. And so they find all kinds of crazy things on the internet. The Jordan Peterson phenomena, which is kind of waning again now, was a thing. And other even more unsavory characters, the young men find. And you hope they find the church. And the confessional churches doing what they're supposed to be doing in living a true Christian life, which is a life that both men and women can lead. And I think in historic Christianity, there's a robustness that I hope some of these young men are finding, and some of the young men are finding, right, coming back to church. If the church is coded conservative, and so they're running to it for that reason, okay, great. We'll deal with that. We'll take them in. We'll disciple them, and we'll steady them up. I think you can look. We had Charlie Kirk out here a little bit ago, and he's an interesting example of like a kind of outreach to young men that is sort of coded like just generic conservative, political conservative, or other things. But I think is having a really good effect on young men in terms of helping them even encounter Christ through what he's doing. So there's a lot of things going on, but that'd be my initial part of it is like young men are more willing to say what we're doing now is awful and I want something different. And we've really reached an unhealthy point for them. And I do blame the educational system for a lot of it. The breakdown of the family is some of it, but sitting and being told that for years and years, you're kind of done with it.
So back to kind of that cultural side, let's identify a couple. I mean, you've said you've written on, certainly gender and sexuality is kind of at the height of it. If we can identify a couple issues, and then I kind of want to explore what are the reasons that these fruits, like what's going on with the roots and the trunk of the tree that's leading to these manifested issues.
So some of these, I would say a lot of these are manifestations of a loss of a recognition of first the goodness of man and woman, that man and woman are both good, part of the original creation, and then their partnership in a divine mission. So I think Genesis 1-3 is just foundational for Christian discipleship and for thinking about Christian living. And that story of creation, the account of creation where God makes the world, puts man in it, gives us our distinctive nature with our unique capacities of language and rationality and morality, and puts us there as man and woman, male and female, as partners in this task of dominion. Distinctive partners, not the same. And you can see all kinds of distinctions in the creation account, right? Adam's created first and then Eve. The Apostle Paul talks about that. but even their mode of creation is different, right? Adam is created from the dirt, and Eve is created from a rib of Adam. And even the curses are different. They're cursed in their primary vocation after they fall, right? Adam's cursed in his work with the ground, and Eve is cursed in her relationships with other people, right? Pain in childbearing and problems with her husband. And so the greater kind of relationality of the woman is present in the creation account, and the greater orientation to the dirt and to the labor and work of bringing food and products forth from the earth is manifested even in the creation account. And so I think we've lost the sense that men and women are both good, different and good, that they're partners in a divine mission, and that we need each other, and we need to work together with each other to fulfill this divine mission. And it's just like every part of that has been attacked and destroyed in what's happening now. And so part of what I've tried to do in my work in some of my classes over the last decade is to put that picture back in front of young people to show them there's an alternative. So like why is it that 16 and 18-year-old men and women have such different cultural outlooks? Like why is it presented as like a war? Why are they so different from, in terms of how they're thinking? Why is it that men vote right and women vote left from 18 to 25? Why is it that way? And part of it is we're viewing it as a war, as a conflict, instead of seeing, hey, we have a big project to do together. We need each other. We need to work together. We need our own distinctive functions and distinctive roles, of course, and we're all trying to figure out how the 21st century world can accommodate that. But that's the project. We have to do that. And so I think there's a noble goal, like a thing worth fighting for, a thing worth doing that both men and women contribute to in an ennobling way. Like, I would encourage you while you're here visiting town to like talk to some of the families if you get a chance, and talk to the wives and see how they think about their life and what they're up to. And there's no sense that they're second-class citizens in what's going on here. They have a crucial role, one where the men take the lead in all kinds of both in the religious sphere and also in the cultural sphere and the familial sphere. Men are called to lead and to guide and to govern, but women have an essential function, a noble function, a glorious function, and I think you see that in what we're doing here. We try to do that, and I think young people they want a real alternative to just the garbage that's out there.
So yeah, in your denomination, what is your official denomination? It's
So the CREC. The Communion of Reformed Evangelical Churches. Yeah.
And you guys do not ordain women, correct?
No, we don't.
Okay, which we also don't. What's your rationale? It's probably the same as ours, but how do you articulate that if someone were to push back against that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we would use the same articulation that all the Reformed churches have used for a long time, and the Lutheran. It's primarily we have direct instruction in the New Testament from the Apostle Paul that officers should be men, both the elder and deacon, but particularly for the elders and the ministers. So there's explicit instruction in 1 Timothy 3, for example, where the Apostle Paul deals with this, and a general instruction from 1 Corinthians 11, as well as other places, Ephesians 5, that the husband is the head of the wife, the man is the head of the woman. And so that more general ordering that is sort of the most clear in marriage, but is also clear in the church and has a shadow way it works out in society. So we have direct commandment, as well as the pattern of the Old Testament, right, where the priests are all male. Right? There's no female priests. It's that kind of ministerial calling is a masculine calling of governing on the one hand, but teaching and instructing, being responsible for the public order of the church. It's kind of alarming in the Old Testament if you think about how often the priests were using blades in different settings, right? The sacrifices, the chopping up, but if you look for how often the priests have swords, it's pretty shocking. So that task of, again, it's kind of a reflection of Adam's task in the garden, right, of bringing order, cultivating the garden, exercising dominion over the garden. It's kind of guarding and keeping kind of activity is a masculine calling. And again, women to partner partner in the calling and complement that work with their own distinctive gifts and abilities. But yeah, that's the core reason why.
Yeah. So what effects do you see? Because it mirrors well within. You can watch it happen in the church, and then obviously egalitarianism with a feminist expression, especially. You can see kind of across the board the fruits and the consequences when we get this ordering wrong. So how do you see and kind of diagnose what takes place when we miss this divine order?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I'm a lowly philosopher, so I don't know if I can recognize all the particularities of it. I don't know how well I can answer that honestly, because as I said, I actually think it's at the root of a lot of different things. Even just the anxiety we see in young people today, right? So the lack of a father figure who is both strong and good, right? That produces a level of comfort that the world is orderly. There is a God who is in charge, who is providentially looking out for my good. And so this is just, I think, basic psychology, actually, right? That if you grow up without a father, or a father who is either not strong or not good, it leads to all kinds of psychological problems for you. But that's just one example. But I think a lot of the way that young men and women aren't typically today thinking about marriage. We've never had a higher, an older age of first marriage than we do in the country today, right? It's pushing 30 for both men and women. I mean, that's pretty astonishing. I mean, women's childbearing years are already over halfway over, by that point. Actually, the age of first child is earlier than the age of first marriage for young women today, right? So at the average age at which you have a kid is earlier than the average age at which you get married. Like culturally, that's a disaster, right? But that's where we're at. So the lack of marriage mindedness and family orientation to the young people today is a real problem. I don't blame them in a lot of ways, right? Like children are for the most part, what they grow up in. It's only when they get to real, adulthood and maturity, they can start intentionally making decisions to fight back or change or do something different. But I think the future is going to be intentional communities that have these strong families and a commitment to family and children, to a fertility rate that's higher than 1.67 children per family. That's a civilization that has no future. That is a country that has no future. And there was an interesting graph that went around the internet last week of the number of children in the country of Spain, which is kind of one of the worst fertility rates in Europe. And it's just, the downward slope is just kind of shocking. And we're at the point that some countries are in declining population in absolute numbers, right? In absolute numbers. Japan's at this point where they had more deaths than births plus immigration last year. So they're a declining nation, even just numerically, let alone in other areas. So, so I don't know if I'm diagnosing the kind of thing you're thinking about.
Yeah,
I think there's all these diverse phenomena that have a common root. I think they have a common root in that loss of that recognition of this original vocation of man and woman together. And technology is making it worse. And our current secular culture is making it worse, drawing people towards things that are not satisfying and not productive in the long run. I know we've both lived on the East Coast before and seen a very non-family centered environment geared at young professionals to try to keep them as good little widget makers in the machine, right? Good little cogs in the whether industrial or white collar machine. Companies have a vested interest in getting as much productivity out of their employees as they can, men and women. And I'm not surprised that the conservative movement is now breaking with big business. Insofar as big business is pursuing profits, that can be incompatible with living healthy human lives where we do things other than just work in an office all day. We see our kids. We go for walks with our kids. We go throw the Frisbee with our kids. We enjoy nature. We sing, we worship, we have fellowship with other families. Like none of that makes money for other people. And so the kind of materialism and success orientation and sort of pragmatic orientation of America has caught up to us like real bad at this point.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's, I think for a lot of people, they observe what's going on and most people can sense that there's that things are broken. And then they kind of come up with ideas and whatnot. But I think especially with a philosophy background, or for one that's kind of really trying to identify the cultural trends thoughtfully, it's that if you make little missteps, year one, you probably don't watch things fall down, but down the road, like, it just leads to all sorts of things. So, I mean, we've identified at least one with egalitarianism, with feminism, with missing the distinctiveness that goes along with the equality of the male and female, masculine and feminine. And you might think that that's a subject for debate that sits over here, but really it is a central one, because as you're talking, like, this is going to work into the way that we orient our economy, the kind of value systems that we put forward, and what it's going to produce for people that live in that type of cultural expression, what their household looks like. And I'm sure you see this, but you can see a lot of families that, 3 kids, let's say, maybe 2 kids, and those kids get to the high school age and they're troubled. They might have anxiety issues. They don't really respect their parents at that age. And I hear it all the time where it's like, well, wait till they're teenagers, And I've talked to so many really faithful parents that are like, no. Like, when they're teenagers, like, those are great years, and we've got great relationships with our kids. So why do we assume that our kids are going to rebel against us and hate us for a period of time and go do things that we never trained them to do? And it's because I think we haven't thought through clearly what if we go along with the culture and these assumptions and we just kind of buy into them, what do those fruits do? It destroys all of the things that we as a society should value.
Well, if you teach them that life's about having fun and doing cool adventures and rebelling against the man, then that's what they'll do as teenagers, right? They'll recognize that that's what you love, that's what they're going to love. So, but it does not have to be that way. I won't say our kids were like some kind of like ideal angel children as teenagers. We had our conflicts at various points, but nothing like what you've described, right? I mean, they love God. They're walking with Him. They respect us. I think there's this thing actually that when they move out of the house, they take on a new appreciation for what they had when they were at home, not just financially, but like just spiritually and the health of the family. They realize that was a great thing. That is a good thing, and I'm so happy for that. And so I've got actually much closer to my son after he moved out. In the last couple of years. So, and I do. But to get back to what you were saying, I do think that these issues of sex and marriage and family and men and women are far more central than we give them credit for. They're not just like, well, here's this doctrinal thing over on the side that I guess we believe, but I just sort of head nod to that. Really foundational. They're foundational to living, and to civilization, to culture, to the health of nations. The family is the cell of the nation. Like, they are. The families are essential to the health of society. So it's not surprising that as we've ignored the health of that family unit, that we have disorder in society writ large. And I do think, so that's one of the things I would point to. I think modernity, there's things that happen in modernity that are also corrosive to the household. And this gets us into other areas, but individualism is one of the things that we can kind of identify. You can see that politically in different ways. You can see it almost epistemically in different ways. If you think about like Rene Descartes and the story the arguments that he makes, even in epistemology, your listeners might have heard the famous cogito argument, I think, therefore I am, right? So for Descartes, his own individual reflections on his own mind are the epistemological foundation for everything else that he comes to believe. So at the epistemological core of what he believes and thinks is himself as an individual, like an isolated individual. His mind's a distinct individual thing, and only comes into contact with other individuals later, through whatever processes. So if you think of yourself as fundamentally an atomic individual, like I'm just an atom, you're just an atom bouncing around, and we have no relation to each other intrinsically, that's very corrosive over time. I think even the kind of classical liberalism of John Locke and others, what's the unit they start with is this individual citizen who's somehow fully formed and mature, and like this individual, right? And if the individual citizen has associations with others, they're all freely chosen associations of one atomic person choosing to relate to one other atomic person. And so it's this kind of this atomization that you see in modernity, I think reflected even in epistemology, reflected in political philosophy, reflected in our science. There was a period where the atom or the corpuscle was the fundamental physical thing. Now we have no idea what the fundamental physical thing is. It's quarks or strings, or we make up all this stuff we don't know yet. Fields, quantum fields. Actually, if it's a quantum field, that might be a big improvement over atoms, but we'll see where that goes. But this atomization, and so I think if you think that you are just an individual, that's just, that's a problem from the outset. Obviously, we are individuals, but we are individuals that are already in community, in communion with others from the very beginning. And again, you see this where? In the family. People don't come into the world out of nothing. They come into the world through the love of a father and a mother, uniting together. And it's only that communion that produces a child. And that child comes into the world only necessarily biologically related to the man and the woman, and ordinarily they're then socially related to them as well. Mm-hmm. He's already socially related to the mom because gestation means baby knows mom no matter what. Mom has the tightest social communion there. The man has a different communion to the child across a different kind of relation. He doesn't have the same biologically mediated connection. He contributes biologically, obviously, but then his union to the child is one more of like chosen commitment. Mom is like required to have the child. Man has to commit. And that's a difference of kind of mode of communion, I would say. But we come into the world only through that communion, and already in family units. And of course, we all come into the world in communion with God, right? God's the person that we can never escape from. He's always with us. And so we should think of ourselves more communally from the outset. It doesn't destroy individuality. We're all individuals. We have unique abilities, personalities. We have to cultivate that in our children, and we have to enjoy it in each other, right? Each of us is a unique person. Mm-hmm. But we're not atomic. We're not just atoms that bear no connection to each other. We're like a rich web, right? We're like nodes in a web. We're parts of a body, right? The organic metaphors are better than the kind of non-organic ones for human life. So that's another thing I think is maybe it feels very abstract, individualism, something like that. But I think it really works out in how you think about yourself. And as people grow up in families that have one child or two children, that don't have cousins around, that don't have a lot of aunts and uncles around, upside down family trees, it's hard to see the web, right? It's hard to see that the thicker body that's there that you're supposed to be contributing to, that you're part of. You have an identity, you have a meaning, you have a purpose. You don't have to just construct it out of thin air like you're some existentialist genius who can find some cool life plan that's worthy of putting on Instagram. Like, no, you have a normal life that does these things that are good and meaningful and beautiful and lovely and rich. So I think a lot of trends in modernity are corrosive to that. And that's where I do think the studying that I've done in the ancient world and the medieval world shows you a different picture. Like, they don't presume that you're a like atomic individual. You don't read that anywhere in antiquity. Like, so it's nice to read old things and just to get a very different take on something like, wow, they were thinking about us very differently. Doesn't mean you have to agree with all of it, but boy, it gives you some perspective, perspective on things like this, as well as on the sex and family stuff, right? Like, they never would have thought that men and women were identical and interchangeable widgets in some kind of, modern world. The ancients and medievals don't think that way.
You can see different ways that this, as you said, like that might sound abstract for the person that's listening and whatnot, but I mean, just to get real tangible, go a couple. I mean, for one, I think it does produce a kind of dislocated understanding of freedom. Yeah. In that freedom today is usually this idea of I sit above as many options as possible, and that means, so the more free I am means the more options I can do A, B, C, D all the way down to Z. And if I only had options A, B, and C, I would be less free, right? Which is a very, self-autonomy, sovereignty in a way. But that's not biblical freedom.
Even kind of a market option, right? Like you have to have like a whole store of 800 options in front of you, and you're more free. Yeah.
I think Timothy Keller, in one of his books, he uses that reference of iRobot or whatever. Okay. And I don't remember if I have seen the movie. It's been years.
I'm not like familiar with it.
Yeah.
In detail.
So I think it's an older movie. I think Will Smith's in it.
Okay.
And it's an idea of a robot that kind of gains almost like AGI, like it gains awareness. And I think there's this line where he gains awareness and he's like, now what do I do? And he's like, well, now that's up to you. You got to figure it out. Right. And it's I think in the movie, like it just, at least Timothy Keller plays it out this way in his kind of teaching, is that like, that's a really crippling notion. Like to take a kid and be like, well, what am I supposed to be? And we know, people that are close to us, that their notion of raising their kids is like, well, we don't want to enforce like religion on them or something like that. Like we want to give them as many options as possible. But that's really crippling to a child to be like, well, who am I supposed to be? Well, you got to figure that out. Well, what child or even what fully grown adult can take a whiteboard and map out meaning and purpose and where you go? Like that's a crippling type of freedom versus a parent that's like, well, this is what's good, true, and beautiful, and let's orient you towards this. Yeah. And that is the biblical understanding of freedom, is that first, the good thing is first possible, and then in the end, it actually becomes almost seamless. Not that you actually end up being perfect, but that doing the right thing is always the option that is at least presented before you and makes sense.
That's right. Augustine argues that the less attracted you are to other options other than what's good, the more free you are. Right? So as your passions are drawing you away to evil, as the world, sin, and the devil is drawing you away to evil, and you have to fight against it, like for in this life, right? We have so many things. It's a struggle. Like, I know this is right. I'm going to do it. It's going to be hard. I'm going to do it. Like, the harder the struggle is, the less free you are to do it. Like, the more challenging it is to do it, and the more things impede and stop you from doing it. So the ideal of freedom is not the ideal of maximal choice. The ideal of freedom is seeing what's good and like being fully able to do it, to be unimpeded in your pursuit of what's good, and have full power to achieve what's good. So the more strongly you cling to what's true and are able to do that, like the more free you are. So freedom is much more about accomplishing what's actually good, and the ability to accomplish what's actually good, than the ability to just do any old willy-nilly thing out there. I mean, you think of someone who just does something haphazardly or randomly, like whatever that life is. I mean, it's not something we want to aspire to. Yeah. It's not that. It's not something we want to be. So yeah, our notion of freedom. This is one thing that I would encourage people to read in the Christian tradition. Because they think about freedom, quite differently when you go back before a couple, 100 years. I would love to do a study someday on just 16th century Reformation writing on freedom and looking at what all those early Lutherans and Reform guys wrote about it. It would be a great study. Yeah, I know. I'm not going to name the name. I can't remember the name, but I think it's in the 1800s. I think it was a German. Might have been Lutheran, I don't know, but maybe of the field of like Kierkegaard or something like that. But I think he was one of the first ones that really introduced this kind of inverse understanding of freedom, and it kind of took root, at least philosophically at first, but it impeded some different theological thinking as well. I think it's older. I think you can find it in Hobbes at least, and probably before him. So I think you can find actually more of it, and because the ancients do consider it, I think it's a live option even from antiquity. So I think that's there. Let me follow up on another point you raised about the lack of purposefulness in the world. This is also something that I think is a real problem in how Christians are thinking about the world today. I think we think about nature as if and creation as if it was just atoms in the void. So if you ask someone, what did God make in the beginning? Well, the whole pile of atoms just kind of bouncing around. And then what is meaningful? What is purposeful? Well, that's just human beings and then whatever God says on top of it. And of course, whatever God says is meaningful and purposeful. That's absolutely true. But the question is, what did he make? And what is the world like? And whether the world itself is meaningless and purposeless. And I think when you look at even the creation account and you look at the world itself, you don't see just sterile atoms bouncing around. You don't see sterility, right? You see bursting life and bursting purposefulness. The universe is infused with purposefulness. And so I don't think we should concede to some kind of modern physics that the universe in its own nature is meaningless. And so God kind of tells us our values and we just should do what God says we should do and value what God says we should value. Obviously, we should do what God says and value what he says we should value. But he does that, he teaches us that in part through creation, through natural revelation. And he's also given us a world where what he says fits with what he made. So the word and the world fit together harmoniously, and kind of the fault lines of the world match the fault lines of his word. And so he tells us to do things for our own good, not because he's out to get us. And he tells us, when he says the husband's the head of the wife, for instance, to go back to that earlier conversation, that's not just some arbitrary imposition on random matter. It's not like here's a blank slate of nothingness and God just says, well, there's no reason for it, but I just feel like saying this today. Mm-hmm. And this is how it's going to be. No, he creates a world with men and women and says, here's what you're like, and here's how you should work together, and here's what you should do. And that's true across the board. I think, the sexual distinction is one of the things we see most clearly in nature, but nature is just so purposeful and rich. And so one of the things that I think the classical philosophical tradition has right is recognizing that. Call it natural law, call it whatever you want, recognizing that there are real patterns in nature, real purposefulness in nature that, of course, show the hand of the creator. They're not self-creating. Trees don't create themselves. They come from somewhere. So nature's not self-creating. It comes from God. It's infused with his purposefulness and love and goodness. But he made a world. He didn't just make a pile of atoms. And so I think learning to kind of appreciate the beauty and goodness of creation and to appreciate the fault lines that he's put there and to see the wisdom of God reflected there. So on all kinds of ethical issues, I've worked a lot on kind of ethical questions for most of my teaching career. And I just increasingly see that fit, just like that harmony between the word and the world. They go together. There's rich structure and purpose and meaningfulness in the world that matches just gloriously what God says in his word. And because of sin, it's often hard to see it in the world. And so study the word and then look back at the world and see that goodness present in it. See that design and order and purposefulness present in it. I'm preaching now, but you got me going.
This is really, so have you, Paralandra, have you read Paralandra?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like what Lewis does there, I think, is just brilliant when he's dealing with gender. So he's got Malacandra and Paralandra being unveiled, and it's kind of masculinity and femininity. And his whole point, he's got this great, it's one of my favorite places in his works. That might be an overstatement, but it's beautiful. And he basically says, like, so he's writing now. So it's C.S. Lewis saying, Ransom, who's the main character who watches this takes place, has healed me of this very type of thinking that we're identifying here, of like thinking that male and female is just something that's just biological. Yeah. Right? It's just biological. And he's saying, no, these are cosmic truths, that there is a masculinity and a femininity that's woven into all of creation. And it's got purpose in the divine realm and here in the physical, physical creation. But that these things, and he says, well, they go into language as well. There's a reason why all languages ascribe femininity to trees and use it in the feminine term. And then with the masculine, mountains always have a masculine, introduction to it. So that there's these are polar, it's like a sphere split into two parts of the sphere. And there's all of this difference woven into it, and then it's meant to come together, and then it creates this beautiful thing. I think he uses like rhythm and melody, right? That these go together, but they're very different. And it does open up your mind to the complexity, as you're saying, of saying, okay, take God's word seriously, and then you watch it reflected in nature, and you realize that these are cosmic realities. And if you go against that, it's like sprinting against a brick outhouse. It
is, it's running against the wind. It's very difficult to go against the grain of what God has made. Yeah, C.S. Lewis has remarkable reflections on men and women in marriage in a number of his works, and masculinity and femininity. And the Out of the Silent Planet versus Paralandra is a really remarkable contrast. The pastor of Christ Church here in town, one of the founders of NSA, the core founder, has a number of works and writings on C.S. Lewis that also touch some of this. There's actually a book coming out in the next few weeks with the Davenant Institute, which is a reformed outfit by Josh Heron on C.S. Lewis and gender.
Oh,
So,
really?
yeah, it's coming out in the next few weeks. You should find him and get him on the show.
Where's
Really
he
good
at?
guy. So he teaches at Thales College, I believe, North Carolina.
Okay.
He's a young guy. He's a great guy. So all that to say, Lewis is someone who, that's another example, right? What was Lewis's primary work, right? What was his academic life on, right? Pre-modern literature. And so there is something about sort of getting immersed and acquainted with a world, a social world, a religious world that was prior to modernity that can be very eye-opening, right? And really give us some alternatives, right, to what we're doing now. And Lewis, I think, is a kind of model for that.
So let's get specific on the gender.
Okay.
So if you're, because you've written in a lot of different contexts on this subject. Obviously, you've taught, but if you were really trying to articulate to, let's just say, people in their 20s and 30s who are really questioning the traditional understanding of gender, they've really bought into a lot of the secular notions.
Yeah.
Like, where do you start as kind of like a systematized answer? Because we've kind of bounced around to a couple of different things. If you're to in a systematic way, identify the issue and then put forward this right understanding of gender, how would you go about doing that?
Okay. I thought I did that already in my last narrative.
Yeah.
I already speechified on that.
So maybe I can ask in a different way. Are there other aspects that you would add to this? Because we certainly have been painting a picture.
Yeah, I don't. So that's very open-ended. I think a couple things I might say. Again, systematically, it's a big deal. It's a long way. I would refer to what I said there, but a few things I would say. The unease that you feel with what you've been taught, and also just how people are operating today, makes sense. You're not crazy. Things are weird and not good. And so you're right to be like, I don't think it's supposed to be this way. And so that would be the first thing, is just to acknowledge that they've grown up in a pretty rough situation, and they sort of validate that feeling. That is correct. They have. And then encourage them to look to traditional Christianity as a model for possibilities. Don't jump to caricatures. But think, like you were pointing to, like sort of deep underlying systematic issues. And I still think there's no better way to do this than to study Genesis 1 and 2 thoroughly, carefully. There's a number of really good books that are on this. Stephen Clark's book, Man and Woman in Christ, he's a Roman Catholic. He wrote this in the 80s. It's been republished by Warhorn Media. Stephen Clark's book is great. I would encourage people to read that exegesis of Genesis 1 and 2. And then Werner Neuer's book, Man and Woman in Christian Perspective, which is out of print now from Crossway. I really strongly recommend as well. I don't know all the Lutheran resources on this, but the exegesis of Genesis 1 and 2, I think, is the most valuable thing that we can do to try to recover a much more sane approach to these things. And there I think you see the goodness of man and woman as part of the original creation. So neither man nor woman should feel like they are second-class citizens. My masculinity does not make me second class. A woman's femininity does not make her second class. Both are good, part of the original created design. They were created from the beginning for partnership with each other. So both good, man and woman both good, created for partnership together. So we were not meant to be alone, right? That's the first thing that's not good, is man alone. We were not meant to be alone. And that doesn't mean everyone has to get married, but in general, most people should get married. We're not meant to be alone. The original pattern is Adam and Eve together. And even if you're not married, there's ways you can bring your masculinity or femininity to bear for the good of the community and for specific individuals. And then third, we see the distinctiveness of man and woman, that they're different, right? They're both there. They're both good. They're both image bearers of God. They're meant for partnership, but not partnership of two identical people, but partnership of two complements. And so to think about, how can I cultivate my masculinity or femininity in a way that complements the other sex and leads to just fruitful partnership between the two of them. And so that, I mean, I would go back to Genesis 1 and 2 and kind of systematically try to open it up in that way, and realize for both sexes the glory of the task we've been given. I mean, it's an amazing gift from God to be given a human nature and to be given a world like this even though it's fallen in sin now, to be given a world like this. It's an inheritance, right? The genealogies in Genesis 5 and later on, right, trace Adam back to God, right? Son of Adam, son of God. And so we've been given this world as an inheritance, right? To manage, to cultivate, and to leave better than we found it, and to help bring forth all those latent possibilities that are in it, to order it, to organize it, to make it even better, the thing that it is. And man, what a glorious task to do that, and to bring new life into the world together, and to enjoy the richness of the world that God has made, the beauty of it. He could have made a sterile world if he wanted to. He didn't. He wanted to make a world bursting with fruitfulness, bursting with beauty and glory. And so pursue that. Pursue that with your distinctive masculinity and femininity, right? In your distinctive register, your distinctive mode, right? Musical analogies are ones that definitely resonate in this area.
So what would be some tangible? So if you have, a married couple, what are some things that you would say kind of firmly rest on the masculine side, some that firmly rest on for the wife, for the husband? What would that look like? And obviously there's always the kind of the telos and the archetype, and then there's the way that plays out within an individual marriage. That's always going to have some nuance to it. But how would you coach that?
Well, this is where everyone gets uncomfortable, right? Because there's stupid caricatures out there that are from the 50s or something. I mean, for starters, the 50s are bizarre, right? So don't look at the 50s for anything. The 50s produced the 60s, right? Did you like the 60s and 70s? No? Well, maybe you should be skeptical of the 40s and 50s. So that's weird. The 50s are weird. So that's not the model. So I hesitate here because you could say some things quickly that I think I could demonstrate if I had another hour.
But we have some time.
But I don't want to do that. Okay, well, I have another hour. Okay.
And we can even get some context as well to this. So,
So let's start with the most obvious is something like primary wage earning. Production of the necessities of life is a male responsibility. So to be the one who is the primary and responsible for bringing in wages would be one masculine responsibility. The care for young children would be one that's more clearly feminine. And I think you just see this. So the principle would be reflect on what happens to have children, and reflect on what has to be the case to have a bunch of children. And then the kind of stuff that falls out of that is the kind of stuff that transcends culture, right? So stuff that's rooted in biological and then social necessities for having a bunch of kids in the house. That's what's going to dictate what happens. So if mom's going to be pregnant for a lot of her 20s and maybe a lot of her 30s or some substantial period of that, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 15, whatever it is, there are a lot of things she's not going to do because her energy's given over to producing the child, gestating the child, and then nursing the child. So if you're going to have a household with more than one or two kids, that is going to be a substantial commitment on the wife's part for her in her 20s and 30s. I'm going to give serious love to these children. I'm going to give my bodily calories to these children, and then I'm going to give this love to these children. So caring for young children is something that's going to fall onto the mother. And then activities which are not compatible with caring for small children are going to devolve onto the father, like typically the kinds of productive enterprises that produce food, shelter, clothing, or in our economy, the wage earning that we trade for that. So that doesn't mean mom can't be economically contributing. There's ways that happens all over the place. It's not a hard and fast dyed in the wool rule, but you're not going to have mom doing some kind of 50-hour-a-week career and having a bunch of kids. Those are physically incompatible activities. So I think that's sort of the principle of it. But the biggest thing is in the relationship between the two, right? In the relationship between the husband and wife, how they relate to each other, right? And how they relate to the children. Is he protecting and providing for the family? So protection and provision activities. And is she nurturing the family and partnering with him in that work? So I think those are the principles. I think there's standard ways it tends to work out today, but our economy is weird. We have an industrialized information economy. That's very strange. And I don't think we can look actually to any decade as the perfect model for this anymore. I mean, think about work from home and the way that a lot of jobs now have become white collar and digitally based. And with internet communication, those can be done from home in a way that no 1950s, white collar job could be done. You had to go to some office somewhere to do a 1950s white collar job. You don't have to do that today. Now, there are reasons why we probably should still have offices and meet in person and do a lot of our stuff in person. But is that 5 days a week, a 10-hour-a-day job? No, it's not. You can do a lot more from home. Now you can have lunch with the kids if you work from home. You don't have the commute time that you've lost and the energy in the commute that you've lost. So there's new possibilities of work from home arrangements that are revolutionary for families and the amount of time that dad can be around the kids, for instance. Especially in their late elementary and on in their years, but to be around as an influence earlier as well. So I think this is an opportunity moment that as technology grows, we have to continue to think about what does faithful household living look like in the 21st century. And there's no one size fits all model. Look at case studies from the past. But really the pre-industrial model, which has been for most of human history, is with man and woman as economic partners, woman focusing energies on the children, but also gathering food in hunter-gatherer societies, helping to process and store food has been a pervasive part. Producing clothing is an economic activity that's always been women's work, that only now is no longer women's work. So it's just it's an ongoing story. But I would say the less that if you start thinking of yourself as men and women and not just atomic individuals, you want to think about what's actually good for my household and what's good for everybody, not just what do I feel like doing today, but what's actually good for everybody. And then as you realize that and you start doing that, you start to enjoy it, and then you realize I actually want to do that. So I don't know if you want to push on one part of that or the other, but those are the most obvious ones that we need to recover. But you're not going to do any of that if you're not committed to like having children and all the things that go with it. That's the hurdle. If you decide I'm going to have kids, I'm going to have a big family, most of the rest of it works itself out. Yeah. Unless you're really dysfunctional, there are problems. There are problems that arise, but like that's the needs of the household drive it really. Again, the world and the word work together. Yeah.
So to kind of build on that, because I think that's interesting. So one thing that I've kind of maybe light bulbs gone off on, and I've talked and presented on this in a couple areas, but I kind of push that you are an entrepreneur, and by that, like everyone should be entrepreneurial. We normally think of like a business and whatnot, and perhaps, but in the way that you approach your family, you should be entrepreneurial. And being entrepreneurial means you first off, you challenge the status quo. You kind of figure out, you say, okay, I'm going to challenge this. I'm not just going to be a leaf in the wind. This is what we want to do. You kind of create a vision, and then you create a roadmap in order to accomplish that, right? And endorsing that for the family, saying, okay, you're a young married couple, or, we've got 4 kids and we're in our mid-30s, right? So, I mean, we're saying, okay, what do we want our life to look like for the sake of our kids, over the course of the next 10 to 20 years? And we say, okay, well, what kind of things do we value? Do we want to, what kind of experiences do we want to have with the kids? How do we want their time to be oriented? How do we create a devotional life? All of these things, right? And then you kind of map that out. That's what we want it to look like. Well, how do we get there? What do we have to accomplish, right? So if you were to go back to yourself maybe 15 years ago, as you're kind of in the thick of it, what advice would you give yourself to say, hey, do these things as a family. Like, do these things, father, do these things, mother, do these things together, orient your household in this way. What would be some advice that you'd give?
Yeah, that's a great question. My first thought, actually, which is advice I did take that I would give to a lot of people, is don't overthink it. You sound like you've overthought that, like so much. Like,
I mean, hyper analytical mind.
Yeah, I mean, you sound like don't take. I would say to most people, don't take that as the model. Like, try to live like a faithful Christian. I think you want to major on the majors, which is family dinners. Prioritize that as much as possible, because boy, when those kids get to the teenage years and they're able to move around in the world a lot more, it's harder to make that happen. So prioritize that and make that a principle. And that shows, there's all kinds of studies that show that has huge health. So if you eat dinner together all the time, that's crucial. Family worship of some kind or another, whatever that's going to look like. Read the Bible together with your family on a regular basis. Make that a priority to happen most nights, that you do that. I've been really on again, off again with that. I've had weird commuting schedules on the East Coast where I'm not home till 8 p.m. 2 nights a week and things like that. It's very hard to make that happen in that environment. But that's a principle to it. But I do think that in a way, the feeling of the house is more important than whether you did your 12-step plan correctly. Do your kids know that they're loved? Do your kids recognize the goodness of God? Do they love God? And are they doing that? I'm far more concerned with things like that. And there's different ways to skin the cat on that. But I'm more worried about, encouraging moms and dads to love their kids in that way. And I do think that requires entrepreneurial vision at this point in our life, and to think about what are the things that are impeding that I'm just used to doing because that's when I grew up in the 90s or the 2000s, that's what we did. What are the things that are like, that's actually not helpful? Why am I doing that? And so that would be like my more general advice. The 12-step plan, I'm a little more skeptical of. I do think we were talking beforehand. I do think you need to have a community of like-minded people. Not that you all think the same or everybody's as radically cool as you or something like that, but you need to have people broadly on board, other families that your kids can look to as peers that are pulling in the same direction. You've got to have a good church. So being in a good church with a good church culture, like there's nothing better than that. Go to church every week, throw yourself into volunteering at church, do things with other church families, hospitality. If there's a secret sauce to it, it's stuff like that, right? That's your kids are going to learn what you value when you do stuff like that. Like we have people over every week. That's a principle. Do that. Your kids will be like, oh, I now see that that's important. So it's far more about what you love and what you're pursuing than any entrepreneurial plan, right? You're thinking like an economist on this. So you have to be humane, man. Be humane.
So what? So go ahead.
No, yeah. Sorry to criticize you on your own. Podcast.
No, that's fair. I mean, I guess so. To push back,
I like the entrepreneurial part of it, and there's a lot of like detailed planning you do have to do at certain kind. And there are times where you're like, man, what is going wrong here? And then you do want to sit down and put your thinker cap on, like, why is this going so wrong?
Yeah. Because I would say, even talking with you've been more entrepreneurial than you'd think in that you've identified. So so you guys, for instance, homeschooled, right?
We did.
So homeschool would be very non-status quo when you guys were doing it. That's trended, right? But so analytical mind, the way that we're approaching something like that is, okay, we know the status quo is kindergartner is out of the house for 35 hours a week. Middle school, same thing, but now you've got sports plugged in. How do you get the family dinner? How do you get the memories that, that the kids, latch onto? These are bright moments when they're in their 20s and 30s, and they just have sentimental reactions towards these good things, right? So it's, by entrepreneurial, I mean saying, okay, let's take out a whiteboard and say, okay, how are we going to navigate the weekly time for the kids? And it doesn't mean we're here at 2 and here at 4, but it's saying we need to at least open up time while we can allow them to explore good opportunities, sports or whatever it is, piano, but that we're also not doing that in a way that then forces them out of the household for all the time, where they don't spend time with their siblings, and which I mean, we've talked about that. You've done all those things.
I totally agree with that.
That's what I mean by entrepreneurial. I don't mean
a
minute by minute plan throughout the week.
And the entrepreneurial spirit, I do think, is necessary at this point. At a lot of levels, we talked earlier a little bit about schooling and sort of all the churn that's happening right now in Christian education, because it got very stagnant and very much just became a copy of what the world was doing in the late 20th century and down to right now still. And so the need to reform, right? So I would say entrepreneurial reform, entrepreneurial renewal, entrepreneurial revival, both in education but I do even think in terms of businesses as well. I mean, it's a pretty crazy cultural moment that we're in at a lot of levels. People were fired for their jobs for not taking a certain vaccine, things like that. Who knows what's coming down the road in the future? To have there is a certain kind of even economic wisdom in building more sustainable, reliable, and durable, hopefully even anti-fragile companies and economic systems and partnerships. And so developing skilled abilities and saying, why am I doing this for DuPont? Why don't I do this for myself? I do think Christians need to increasingly think that way. The industrial economy and market economy for the last 100 years has really pressed for, creating these concentrated, large enterprises. And that's been not really a win across the board. Some things you have to have big scale to do, right? Building airplanes is going to take a big company. Yeah. But there's lots of things that don't. And the more that we can kind of decentralize our economic base for Christians, it'd be much better if we own a lot of the companies. And then we can have, policies where our people can be home for dinner and we can do work from home a couple days a week, and we can do things like that are much more conducive to the household. So I actually really appreciate the entrepreneurial part. One of the things I love about living in Moscow actually is the entrepreneurial spirit. Why can't we just fix it? Yeah. Why can't we just do it better? Like, who says we have to do it the same way? It has to be worse. Why can't we just do it better? And that is a good instinct. Yeah. Like, I totally encourage that for young people. Again, because we're in a moment where a lot of things just aren't good anymore. And so if they're going to be good again, we've got to go do it. Yeah. Well said. Yeah.
Pivoting slightly, but still in this vein.
Sure.
I'm interested to hear, because I have no clue. I would have some guesses, but for your church body, what are your stances on birth control and IVF?
Okay. So you're asking someone who's only been in Moscow 2 years, and also someone who has taught on those subjects for the last 15 years. So I have my own view that, again, it would take a long time to, I think, try to make persuasive. I do think that, my official answer is, I don't know what position papers we have, so ask the pastors. Yeah. At this point. Now, with that being said, Reformed denominations like the Presbyterian Church in America, the Orthodox Presbyterian Church, they have position papers that I am familiar with on some of these things, and like the LCMS does as well. Right? I know that your denomination has written a little bit about this. So I don't have a denominational answer on that for you right now. I will say, when you look at Christian civilization, including down into late modernity, they would have been appalled by the idea of artificial reproductive technologies and the way that we are industrially producing children through medical means. And so obviously we used to not have the technology to actually do that, but the approach to childbearing and family life from the past is quite antithetical to that. I think we're at a moment that really Christians pretty much shouldn't use artificial reproductive technology at all. I think there's practically no way to do IVF in an ethical fashion at this point. Pretty much every means of doing it involves discarded embryos. And I don't think there's really any way to use that technology that isn't going to lead to abuse of it in a very serious way. It's almost impossible to do it and not screen the embryos, for instance. The way it's usually done, there's a bunch of embryos that are produced. Well, you have to shoot mom full of chemicals. Let's start with that. That's already a bad idea. I mean, we won't even eat chicken that has chemicals in it. Why do we shoot mom full of chemicals for a year to try to get a whole bunch of eggs from her? So there's problems from the get-go even there. How do you ethically collect semen from the man? I mean, how are you going to do that in a way that's consistent with Christian principles? Anyway, you can't even get this started, I think, ethically. I think that's a problem ethically. But when you then go on to produce the embryos in the lab. They're screened for success. Are you going to invest tens of thousands of dollars and not do a couple $100 screen just to see if this one's viable or not? No, you're gonna screen it. And then, well, if we're screening it, we should just check for downs and we should just check for a few other things because we're only going to implant a few, and so we really want them to be successful and so on. That's just, to avoid doing that is almost impossible in our current environment, I think. There's a rising trend, I think, to try to encourage Christians not to do that, but instead to encourage them to do what's called snowflake adoptions, which is to adopt embryos that have already been created and are currently sitting frozen in labs around the country. We actually don't know how many there are. There's hundreds of thousands, but there's no official count because nobody has to report this stuff because it's the Wild West right now legally. That's another example of how the abuse is just rampant. We have no idea how many embryos are frozen around the country. We can guess, but we don't know. But there's a push to have Christians adopt these embryos as well. I think that's a kind of issue that the church needs to think through further as well. Anytime I think that you're introducing a third party into the reproductive process, I think it's a huge mistake. Anytime you're introducing genetic material from another person, you're now intentionally creating a life that's not going to have biological mom and dad as their mom and dad. And so anything that we're engaged in that's like that is something we should not be engaged in. So the snowflake adoptions are a longer story. Obviously, that would be the least bad thing to do in the situation is just stop making any more embryos. And then if you adopt the ones that are there, that would be the least bad thing to do. This would take, I think, another hour to try to convince people of. I really actually don't think we should do that either. I actually think those embryos are in a horribly tragic situation where there's actually no ethical way to save them. Because the only way to save them is to put them into a woman who's not their mother. Mm-hmm. And then that woman is reproducing with someone out there who's not her. So I don't think it's as simple as it's adoption. I don't think it's adoption. It's using the womb. Mm-hmm. It's not just wet nursing. It's introducing foreign genetic material into the womb of a woman. And that I think is a line that I think is the line that we shouldn't cross. So I actually think, and this, I know people look at me crazy when I say this stuff.
I'm with you on all this.
But yeah. I think the thing to do is the horrible thing, because we've done a horrible thing, and now we have to confess that we've done a horrible thing. We have done a horrible thing in making millions of embryos, and we've done a horrible thing, and we've done it, and we've allowed it to happen on our watch. And now we need to confess it, and we need to repent of it, and we need to not further the damage anymore. So I think the ideal thing to do, to prosecute people, we should do that. To make it illegal officially with severe penalties for engaging in any of this stuff in the future. Shut down all the clinics. And then we should have a national day or week of mourning, a somber official season of mourning for what we have done. And then we should turn all the freezers off and do a mass burial and say like the Holocaust, say never again. Never again. We've created a Holocaust. And now we should repent of it. So anyway, I think that's what should be done, but more generically, the whole industry of artificial reproduction and the reproductive industry is just appalling at this point. You should think of it as an industry that's making money. You should think of it as an industry that is contributing to the destruction of the nuclear family. We're trying to make it easier to remove babies from families. That's what's happening. Mm-hmm. And I know the ideal that the ideal they're aiming at, they say they're aiming at is to put children into families. I know that's what they're aiming at, but we're destroying the thing that actually does that. Right? We're destroying the union of husband and wife as the thing that produces the children. So that's, again, an organic structure. It's a creational structure. It's not going anywhere, right? It costs tens of thousands of dollars to do this. We destroy a bunch of embryos in the process as we're doing this IVF stuff. So I'm not trying to be flippant about any of it. I've looked at this a lot, and I would encourage people to really rethink that. When it comes to contraception, I think we're in a similar boat of needing to really rethink it. Obviously, contraception is something that is just unthinkingly used by most Christians. It's part of modernity. It's part of what people think of as the blessing of modernity. You don't have to have a bunch of kids. So you can explore your individual freedom and your personal life plan for yourself, apart from things like other people who love you, apparently, which is what children are. And so I think contraception is one area that there is historical writing on. The church has been writing on this for a long time, starting with abortion and infanticide, which are the original forms of contraception, as well as other kinds of potions and medications. In the ancient world, cultures had herbs and medications that they thought could induce miscarriages, and there were prohibitions on that. If you go read the Hippocratic Oath, it involves not helping a woman procure an abortion, right? So they had systems that even in very primitive medical times, they weren't doing surgical abortions, as far as I know, but medical abortions with kind of medication. So there's a very old and very long-standing Christian opposition to destroying life at an early stage and to using things whose intention is to not have there be life. So using things where we've made this thing, the purpose of this thing is to make it so there's not life. We should be very suspicious of things like that. And so when it comes to the modern world, it's really not till 100 years ago that any Christian denomination embraced contraception for any reason. So you go back to 1910, you cannot find a Christian denomination that endorses the use of contraception for any reason. And so that is one where it's like, this is very clearly like a last 100-year thing. And the 20th century was basically a disaster in every way except for economic. It was just spiritually, morally, right? We killed more people than any other century. Just in raw deaths, we killed more people than any other century. We destroyed the family. Like it was bad, right? If an idea doesn't exist before the 20th century, that's a scary idea. Like, that's not good. So it's only the last 100 years that we've really been doing this at all, having any contraception in the church. And so I really think we need to rethink the use of it today. And I've labored with young people to try to encourage them to rethink their use of it. Coming short of just bringing the hammer down on the full prohibition and just like scaring people off immediately. Al Mohler, who's the president of Southern Seminary, the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, has a little piece online from years ago urging Christians to be careful about falling into a contraceptive mentality. So he doesn't say you shouldn't use contraception, but he says you should worry about falling into a contraceptive mentality. And I'd be curious to talk to listeners and other people about how many couples you've encountered. Well, people don't talk about this, but if you have ever heard about what somebody does, right? How many couples have you encountered that have used contraception and not fallen into a contraceptive mentality? Once it's there, it's the default. And then if it's the default, you realize like your whole marriage, you're basically going to have non-procreative sex. Like your default is let's be sterile. I mean, that's I had a moment in my own life where I realized, is that what that is? That's insane. Right? Let's just, most of the time, let's be sterile, but then like once a year, let's try to have a kid. Like, what are we doing? Like, that's just like, in what other part of our life do we think that's a good idea? So I actually think this is an area where the Roman Catholics have been far ahead of the Protestant denominations and how they're thinking about it. And I think we have a lot to learn from the Roman Catholics on this particular thing. So there's a lot of good materials out there by Roman Catholics that I think are broadly on the right track and ones that we should learn from. I do think there's ways Protestants can do it better, actually. I think Lutherans and Reformed actually have some resources. We're not committed to all the things that the Roman Catholics are committed to theologically. And we're also not tied to thinking Pope John Paul II was kind of the last best word on everything gender related. So I think there's some ways we can actually do it better than they're doing it. But I think there's a lot to learn there. And the Catholics, of course, the Roman Catholics, their official position is that any use of any kind of artificial technology, any kind of technology to try to impede fertilization is not permissible.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's the pill or condoms or the interuterine devices, which are increasingly common today, all those have as the mechanism of their operation impeding fertilization or the destruction of the zygote once it's formed. And so the normal kinds of contraception that most people use are not permitted. Does that mean we have an obligation to maximize the number of children we have? I don't think so. I think there are ways to try to rationally space out the number of children that you have. If mom nurses, that actually naturally spaces out children. There's lots of evidence from pre-modern cultures that nursing would typically happen for a much longer period of time than we do now. That might be socially awkward to try to push too far, but that's of course there's that way. But there's actually it's not like a woman's fertility cycle is some great realm of mystery beyond all human comprehension, right? We have a pretty good idea of how a woman's monthly cycle operates, the window within that month that she's actually likely to be fertile. And so the responsible way, if you have a serious moral reason to want to space out the number of children that you have, there is a way to do that, and that is to voluntarily, cooperatively, through only with prayer, as the Apostle Paul says, to restrain from the sexual union during the fertile times of the woman's cycle for whatever period of time that you deem to be, for a serious reason, not a good idea to keep having children. That's what the conservative Catholics are saying now. I think that's basically right.
Natural family planning.
Yeah, it goes by natural family planning. They're always inventing new kind of acronyms for it. There'll be some new trendy thing that the focus groups say works better for young people. But I think I think natural family planning is sort of the 10 years ago version. It's the fertility awareness methods is what they're calling it now. Fertility awareness. FAM. And this is probably a new one. I don't know.
That's not bad. FAM.
Yeah, it's pretty good. So there's lots of new ones. But another positive part of calling it actually fertility awareness method is a lot of things. If women have health issues of different kinds, often their fertility cycle is something that's affected in various ways. And so if you learn to better monitor what's going on with that and to be aware of, for the woman to be aware of her own fertility better, that could actually help with a lot of different medical issues. You're probably aware of this, but the contraceptive hormone pills are being used for all kinds of maladies for young women today. If I don't know how much your readership is actually aware of this, but if a young woman has a really painful period or something like that, or consistently painful ones, or something very irregular about them, or something else that's wrong with them, often one of the medications that's used to immediately try to treat that is the contraceptive pill, because what it does is it regularizes the cycle. And what that does for a number of different conditions a woman could have is basically just blanket over the system, right? Her body was saying something's not right here. Well, let's just throw some chemicals at it and let's just regularize that period. And then you won't feel like that anymore, when whatever underlying issue was there is not actually being addressed medically. So there's lots of medical things that can be talked about, but fertility awareness methods encourage that and can have a number of side benefits for women's health otherwise, I would say. I think that's a big plus to it. And there's lots of resources on the web now. I won't try to describe all them. There's ways of doing this that are more involved than others, but some basic ones are just very straightforward, even just involving the woman taking her temperature every morning at the same time. And that actually reveals more than you would think it would reveal about the timing of the cycle. So I think there's all kinds of methods like that I would encourage young people to use. But in general, why are we encouraging people to use contraception when we have a fertility crisis? And we do in the church as well. There are some churches with large families, sure. But if you look at the church across the United States, our fertility is slightly better than the culture around us, but only slightly. It's not radically different. Nor are our marriage patterns. They're slightly different than the culture around us, but not radically different. right? There could be tiny pockets where it's radically different, but across the broader culture, the data's there. So Mark Regnerus, who's a Christian sociologist, teaches at UT Austin. He has a book a few years ago, The Future of Christian Marriage, where he goes out and looks at all this stuff. And the data is pretty clear on this. Like, we look a lot like the culture when it comes to marriage and when it comes to fertility. So I would just sort of pastorally question the wisdom of encouraging people to use contraception when we have a fertility crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I know there's going to be hard pastoral cases. There's things to talk about. And I'm not out there beating my drum on this every day, trying to whack people over the head with it. But I think it is an important thing. And it's just part of like recovering, again, this original created purpose, right? Being fruitful and multiplying, having dominion over the earth, cultivating the garden. Like, that involves kids. So like, we should do the stuff that produces kids.
Mm-hmm.
And we shouldn't encourage people to do the things that doesn't produce kids. And when the fertility rate's back up to like, 6 children per woman, then come back to me and we'll talk about the birth control discussion, right? Until when it's still at where we're at now, I think, you gotta read the moment. We are not in a moment where we need to preach, some kind of subtle nuance, like, yeah, use contraception here. It's like, dude, why are you doing that?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I don't want to be crass on here, so I won't say a lot of things, but like, why are you doing that? Yeah. Can you imagine Abraham being like, yeah, let's just not have too many kids, right? Like, I know there's this promise, we're going to have as many ancestors, offspring as there are stars in the sky, but we just don't want to have too many, like, right now. I mean, you wouldn't want the stars right now. I mean, that would be bad, right? So I just think if we need to just reorient our hearts on these things and be willing to be entrepreneurially different from the world around us, right? But the world around us is terrible, right? It has no future if it keeps doing what it's doing. So we should live like people that are going to have a future.
Yeah, this whole package is just another good example of you just kind of
Yep.
You breathe in the cultural fumes around you, and
Yep.
when the church goes with those times, it creates detrimental impacts.
Yeah,
So
I think that's right.
we interviewed Dort Preuss, who's the wife of Rolf Preuss, and they had 12 kids, 11 boys,
Yeah.
and I don't know what their age, I would guess they're probably in their upper 70s or so. And they've got 86 grandkids now,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
it's just, so
That's so sad for
that's just
them. I just feel so bad for them.
what an
I mean, they made
unblessed
such
life.
terrible life decisions. I mean, they could have been out touring France or whatever, right? And yet here they are. I mean, I feel so bad for them.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, no, that's amazing. Everybody wants that.
Yeah.
You talk to old people today and like they're hoping for their first grandkid, right? Like to have 84 is just like, what a blessing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and we castrate these wonderful blessings that
Yeah.
God is willing to give to us.
Yeah.
And then we justify it, and then from a church, we just kind of, like you said, with like pastoral advice, it's like, well, yeah, why don't you get your feet under you financially? Take a couple years,
Take a couple
and then
years.
start talking about
Yeah.
kids
It's a personal
and see-
decision.
right?
You know,
Autonomy and
yeah, you have your own life plan, maybe it includes kids eventually.
yeah, not helping people out when we
Yeah.
speak that way.
And even in better churches, like you said, it's like, no, don't get married when you're young, figure out who you are, and don't get married when you're too young, get financially stable and things. And like, the more you place these demands on people, the more unattainable marriage seems. So actually, Mark Regnerus, in his book, I'll mention it again, The Future of Christian Marriage, has a really nice discussion of this, where we've started treating marriage as a capstone to a well-lived life that you have to kind of get ready for. So you have to do this, and you have to do this, and you have to do this, and you have to do this. You have to have a career plan figured out and some money in the bank. And, you should probably travel a little bit because you're not going to be able to do that when you have kids. When you get married, you might have kids. So do some travel like you want to. You might need some higher education. So make sure you're done with whatever schooling, you want to do and get all that done. And then once you've landed somewhere and you've got your job figured out, then you're kind of ready to get married. And then you can find your right spouse. Like, dude, that guy's 34 or whatever at that point. And, he's already missed half of his childbearing life. And so we've made it a capstone, like where you have to be like a super person to get married. It's unattainable for a lot of normal people. Now you have to do all that and make it look good enough for Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
As if doing that wasn't enough, you also have to curate it on social media.
Yeah.
Right. So if a guy can't curate it on social media, he's not a good enough husband material, and vice versa and so forth. So we've made it a capstone institution instead of a cornerstone institution. Instead of something where it's like, you should get married young and you'll be flat broke. That's fine. You'll figure it out. You won't have maybe had a lot of life experiences yet. That's okay. You'll have them together, and you'll figure it out together, and you'll build a family culture together, and you'll find out where you want to go and where you don't want to go together. And will you do it as much as people with no kids? Probably not, because you're investing in something that's more permanent. You're investing in something bigger, right? It's like, you won't eat as much cotton candy if you're eating steak. Yeah. Okay. So what? Cotton candy's fine in its place in moderation, but it's no steak. So treating it as a cornerstone institution, really a formative institution. I mean, like, marriage has traditionally been one of the main institutions that helps form young people into responsible adults. I mean, the change that a man undergoes when he's responsible for a wife is just, you can't recreate that through some other process. And the change he goes through when he has a child, right? And he's like, wow, here's a helpless life that if I don't, get things together and figure it out, like, this kid is going to have a terrible life. Like, that is hugely motivating, and not just out of fear, but like out of love. Like, I want to care for this kid. Like, I love this kid. And there's no other thing that can do that. So this is another reason that the delayed marriage is just bad for us ethically. It's bad for us culturally, civilizationally. And we just can't make the hurdles to entering marriage that high, right? Now, there are some hurdles to entering marriage. It's not like there's no requirements on entering marriage, but they have to be ones that normal people can achieve. And they have to be ones that young people can achieve. And so again, being entrepreneurial, like, I would encourage, your older listeners, like, you should think about being okay with your 22-year-old getting married, even if that impedes grad school or whatever. You should be okay with your 20-year-old getting married. You should think about being okay with an 18-year-old getting married. Because the more you preach the opposite, the more you're setting yourself up for no grandkids, or one grandkid down the road when you're 70 and not when you're young. And you're setting your own kids up for potentially not finding a spouse. And for going through all these formative years without the really healthy love of a spouse, right? The love of a husband or wife, without the responsibility to care for children and all the good things that happens. You should be thinking, how can I pass on my estate to my children while they're still alive? How can I endow them with what they need to have a flourishing marriage when they're young? Whether that's a spot in the family business to be entrepreneurial, I think we should think about that. We should create family businesses so you can give your kids jobs in your business. But passing that on to them, passing on your wealth to them, like, help them with a down payment, help them buy that first minivan that, when they're eking things out, they're not sure how they're going to do it. The wealth that the current boomer generation has is phenomenal, and they should be encouraged to use it in very sane ways for the blessing of their children and grandchildren. Well, now the boomers are having grandchildren, so they're older. But think about passing on some of that estate earlier and not just hoarding it too late. So that's, I think, the kind of thinking we should be engaged in as far as that sort of thing goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All that's great. Let's take a quick break, and then there's a couple things I want to unpack there.
Sounds good.
Okay. Cheers. We hope that you are enjoying today's episode. We just wanted to take a quick moment to highlight with Memento 70 that there are also gift memberships available. So with Lent looming, if you have a friend, father, son, someone that you think would benefit both from the daily devotions that take place on Memento, but also from the fraternities, from the brotherly connections in Christ, and from the habits that are formed through the different disciplines that are encouraged, if you think that would be beneficial for someone, check out memento70.com and you can purchase a gift membership for them. And then we have Discord channels and other ways to get them connected with the thousands of men that are doing the Memento journey. So thanks, and enjoy the rest of the episode. All right. And Bennett says, we're back. So that was just a fascinating a couple of subjects going through IVF, going through contraception, the way that manifests in the family. I thought you covered IVF perfectly. I would just say amen to all of that, so I won't really touch on that anymore. Contraception we could maybe get back into, but kind of one of those last points that I thought was really interesting, and it kind of gets back to what you're talking about with this idea of like absolute autonomy, right? And this notion of, this has been a very popular idea where it's like dad does X, that's his vocation, right? But we never want to enforce the family trade down upon the kids. So the kids kind of grow up, and there is this assumption like, now you have to go off and pave your own way completely.
Right.
And I'm very much enticed by this notion of like, no, if you can bring your kids, and not as a rule of thumb that they have to, but if you can bring your kids into the family business, whether or not you own one, or it just so happens they live with a father who has spent his entire like working life like perfecting and learning about this certain area, and then he's at home talking about it with his kids at the dinner table when they're in middle school, high school. They watch him do it, they understand it. I remember one of the professors, my dad's a pastor, so one of the professors, David Scare, first or second year, he's like, your dad's a pastor. He's like, you're more ready than a lot of the fourth years. And that's not a case for me. Like I was not a hyper brilliant. I came out of business as a background. So I was not, he wasn't anecdotally saying, yeah, Brian, you're an all-star, but he's like, you watched your dad for years and years do this. It's going to make sense to you, so bringing that back to say, I'm not going to force my kids to do what I do, but we should at least encourage and, talk about how this makes a lot of sense. And we can maybe even work together on these things and communicate, and how beautiful is that? So I don't know if you want to comment more on that.
No, I totally agree with that. And I would actually shift to thinking a little bit from encourage, more like to equip or train, right? So, if your kid, if you have a son and he decides he doesn't want to be a pastor, okay, well, you could do something else. But to help him with everything that he could be helped with, so that if he does experience that call, he can do that. And in all the different vocations, to equip the kids, like to train them, like to let them learn the business. Bring him with you as you do some of the pastoral ministry stuff, so you can see what it's like and see what you're doing. And in other businesses as well, like if you run a plumbing business, maybe your kid doesn't want to be a plumber. Okay. But it's much better to be able to do something and then decide not to do something, decide to do something else, than to be in the situation you described where it's like, well, I'm not going to tell you what to do. Just like invent yourself out of nothing. You're nothing right now. Just invent yourself. That's a tall task for, like you said, for anybody. And so to just say, well, I mean, let me teach you how to do something. And then if you take to it, great. And then we'll keep going. And I'll I'll give you a job. Like when you graduate high school, or when you finish college, or whatever it's going to be, right? Like I have a job lined up for you. You'll start, and here's what, and you're already doing it with me anyway in the summers, and you already know how to do this. And so it's a path of least resistance, which is what most of us need in life. Actually, is a reasonable way forward, instead of like this crazy self-creation stuff. A reasonable way forward. Most people end up making a decision like that at some point, right? There's a lot of guys who are 40 and they're like, well, I don't really like what I'm doing, but I can't really like totally switch careers now. Like starting over from scratch would be crazy, and I can't just become an artist right now or something like that. Like you can sort of switch sometimes, but you never go back to zero and start from nothing. Nobody does that. Maybe somebody does, but normal people can't do that. So yeah, I think if we build in a culture, and I've really been impressed with Moscow actually out here. The church culture is very much doing this now. It has real rewards. Then your kid doesn't have to move off to the big city, for example, to find a job. You've created work for them right here. So there's a lot of benefits to it that way. But just equipping our children with the skills they need for life, both in terms of like economic productivity, but also in terms of household management. So if you think about a young woman who has this godly aspiration to be a mother, doesn't have an aspiration for some kind of like really involved career or something, to give her all the opportunities to learn all the skills she needs to manage a household well, which is not easy. I don't know where we got this idea that managing a household is easy, right? As a wife. Most households are very poorly run today. We have, all the kids' anxiety being, example number one, but like poor nutrition. Like, where do we get the idea that nutritious food is easy? Like, so the allowing young women to be almost apprenticed in wifery, right? And the skills she's going to need for the 21st century, all the things that go into that. And to see that obviously modeled in her own home, but then able to contribute in her own home and potentially learning those skills in a bread making business in town, or just there's so many like ways that can unfold. But being intentional, entrepreneurial, and thinking about how can I help set up the young men and the young women in my community for success in their vocations we want them to be able to have down the road. And of course, lots of women work in family businesses as well. There's if you have a family business, there's lots of jobs that the young women can do that they're going to be super good at, right? And even if it's not a 30-year career job or something, right? There's lots of jobs that for a couple years, they can be big contributors.
And then, in many ways, then if you're lucky enough to be able to launch a family business, and to scale it to where the kids can be invited in for the process, at that point, then the business culture mirrors a family culture in that it's like, yes, so my daughter or my daughter-in-law helps with this thing with the business, and she just had a kid. So guess what? It's not this standard like, well, like our handbook says you get 6 weeks, or 3 months, and then you got to be back at 40 hours a week. Like you can be flexible within that company and just do very reasonable things where it's like, okay, like how many hours do you think you could do towards this at that 3? Like, okay, you could pick up 8 hours, and that's not good. Like, okay, let's start doing that. Maybe we pick up a little bit. Maybe we
transition
scale back
to a different
for a couple,
role, or
for 6 months on our growth match, like whatever. It's like how wonderful would that be if you could kind of blanket your next generation and say, you don't have to do this, but we can help train, we can help equip, as you said, towards this. And then this is going to be a type of work vocation that is going to support the main goal, which is I want my kid's family to be a prosperous family in all of the elements that it should be prosperous towards. And thinking generationally in this way is not something, correct me if I'm wrong, because your history better than I do, but that would be a normal concept, right? In I mean, certainly if you go to a place like Italy or whatnot, where it's like, how would you not join into the family enterprise? But like, that's normal. We've really distanced ourselves dramatically from that.
That's a pre-industrial norm everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. It's only when you create businesses where dad goes somewhere else, disconnected from the family, and works for somebody else as the norm, which is what you get with factories or offices and things like that. That's the modern model, and it's obviously extremely efficient at certain things, right? It's very efficient at certain things, but it was very disruptive for intergenerational wealth transfer and skill transfer and all these things. And so, I think leveraging technology in a way that helps the family, right, and produces these things is the way to go. And I lament, it's very, as a professor, right, it's very difficult. You can't like start a college very easily and do stuff like that. But there are other things that I've thought about. How can I try to do this, even if it's an unrelated business? I've thought about that, or ways that my own kids can participate in what I'm doing. My oldest son is considering a call to ministry right now, and I think probably the fact that I've done a lot of different ministry stuff, I've taught at Christian places, I've been active at church, has shown, like you said, it sort of shows them that life a little bit. And so even if I wasn't able to like give him a job, I was able to give him sort of a taste of what certain kinds of vocations look like, where you could kind of move into them in a way that makes sense. Ministry is unique. You should really have a call to that and not just be like, well, my dad's a pastor, so I'll be a pastor.
That's very true.
That's
too.
one job that's a little bit
yeah.
the kind of responsibilities and duties and calling of that's a little different than most.
Mm-hmm.
Most others obviously aren't like that, and none of us are really like called to be a computer programmer versus an electrician or
mm-hmm.
or something like that. That's much more you can learn the family business, and there's no spiritual barrier to any old person being a computer programmer, and whatnot. So,
one of the things, though, I mean, let's imagine your son does go into ministry, and you're a philosophy professor at New St. Andrews. You've been an elder at a church before, right? So what that also does, and I can attest to this with my father being a pastor, is our bonding now is far more than it was at younger ages. And he was a
Yep.
very involved and great father, so I'm not putting it in that way. But
Sure.
why? Because we have a shared passion that is
Mhm.
kind of one of our core passions
Yeah.
in life. So like when we get together, I mean, just talking theology is a blast. And I know he has
Yeah.
to savor it because there was a time period where I was disinterested in theology and very interested in business
Mm.
and carving my own path. And then I kind
Yeah.
of reverted back and, here I am. But that's
funny how much wiser he gets the older you get, right?
it is, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's totally true. Not only shared passion, but like shared responsibilities. You can sort of relate to what they're doing, and shared duties that you can help each other with, like advice,
Yes.
comparing things, understanding and sympathy, even camaraderie.
Mm-hmm.
You can have a kind of camaraderie with your dad now that's a little different than what it was.
Mhm.
You have a rich. There's a kind of mutuality to a father-son relationship at all kinds of ages, but when you're both kind of hitting your stride, and especially in the same calling, that's unique.
Mhm.
Yeah, that adds a lot to it for you and for him, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Comparing that with, a couple where, parents raise kids in the church, maybe fathers, has 3 kids or something like that. And then son goes off and he does not get married, has no kids, and then goes off and,
Yeah.
Is only oriented towards secular work. Like,
Yeah, it's very
how does
disconnected.
that relationship really thrive over the years? And the answer is, it's not that relationship is going to die per se. There's still the father-son aspect, but it hasn't passed on. The loves haven't passed on.
Yep.
The orientation has not passed on. The shared experiences haven't passed on. Like those things have again been castrated.
If it stays, it's likely to be shallow. If it stays, it'll be over something superficial like sports or fishing, and it won't have that like the thing that we're doing, like we're all in this together thing, right? It won't have that big end that they share.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be very, very broken down. Yeah, and our challenge today is a lot of us are in situations like that, like and needing to figure out how do we get back together and have that big end in common, even if we can't, change careers mid-career. I don't think I should change careers. I think I'm doing what I'm meant to do, but I'm one of 4 siblings. We all live in different places.
Yep.
Just to do like a normal American thing, and all faithful Christians. We actually have really sweet community when we're together, and we call each other and things. My dad's an accountant. I'll give one more personal story. My dad's an accountant. His dad was an accountant. My one brother is an accountant. Right? I'm the one that missed out on the family job, but I've found out my brother's transitioned roles in his job a few times last few years, and we were all together this summer, and I found out my brother's been calling my dad every week with advice about nonprofit accounting, especially religious nonprofit accounting, because my dad's been doing that for the last 20 years, and now my brother's doing that. Does my brother have a leg up on everyone else because he can call my dad? Absolutely. And do they have like a pretty cool bond that they share because of that? Absolutely. I mean, my dad and I have our own things, but that's an enrichment factor that I think people should take more seriously. Trying to make these are just all. It's like the economic is one more way, right? We can try to rebuild the body, and the economic is very much rebuilding kind of the practicality of the household and the family and the body. So that's a pretty important area that's that's also been neglected, because again, we assume we're atomic individuals. We're going to make our own way in the world, and that includes economically. So we're all just going to be disconnected. We're all just little profit makers, and that's how the businesses view us, and that's how we view ourselves. And so we flit from business to business, and we do this and that and the other thing, and very disorienting and disheartening after the whole thing. So
I'm going to give you a question here, and I'm going to kind of bridge 2 things so that you can kind of take this in the way you want. So
okay.
Want to get into we've been talking about in some ways formation.
Yeah.
Certainly on the educational side, and what you're doing with classical education really kind of cuts to that. So the importance of forming a character is one. The other side of the question, and you can kind of see which way you want to take this, but you, at least for a couple of years, you've certainly experienced this here in Moscow, that one of the things that Moscow, well, maybe not all of Moscow, but certainly kind of the Christian movement here is known for is really trying to solidify a Christian community where everyone is kind of called together to live an intertwined life where their Christian faith is not just a personal thing, it's a public thing.
Yep.
It's something that kind of weaves them together, which of course would lead to formation, especially as kids that are growing up in a community like this. So if you can just kind of talk to the importance of how we form character within the church, and, education obviously plays a role in this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, education in the broadest sense is the factor here, right? So to think about in the modern world, we've got a pretty shallow notion of education, right? What passes for education today is quite shallow, and we want to give our kids an education. It's usually something quite simple and shallow. It's usually job training. Can you memorize some facts and figures, and do you have the skills to get a job? And so the economic kind of predominates in that thinking about education. That stands in radical contrast to the biblical and the classical approach to education, where, yes, there's an economic component to it, but that's far secondary to the primary component, which is spiritual and ethical. That the main education we want for our kids is spiritual and ethical. And so that the forming of the character of the child is the preeminent educational task. That they come to know and love God, that they come to have integrity, courage, temperance, justice, love, all the virtues. That's the preeminent task.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have people like that, then it's going to spill out into all of life. It's going to spill out into the economic. It's going to spill out into the civic, the societal, the cultural, the artistic. It's going to spill out everywhere. So that the classical tradition and going back to Plato, and the biblical tradition from the beginning of God's interaction with man, and you see it with Abraham and on, is the focus on this formation of character. I'm teaching Plato's Republic this term. I've taught it before, and it's an education-focused work. And what kind of education is the most important? The character education, the affections of the soul. And you do need some people to have very serious intellectual formation. You need some people to do that as well, but every single person needs the character formation, and every single person needs the practical training for life too, at a basic level. And then some of us need to go on to do more. Some of us need to go on to the more intellectual training, and that's what college used to be, is that training, instead of just really bad job training, which is what it is now. And so that's what college should get back to being, is helping intellectually prepare young men and women who are of sound character and sound mind, to be able to go on to leadership roles in culture because of their understanding that they possess. So that's the old view, is that those who are really going to govern at a civic level, societal level, and take that kind of leadership do need more intellectual training. You don't just want to get by with your 8th or 12th grade education, for your mayor. That's not the best. And even for the guy who's going to run the family business, the spillover effects are pretty valuable too, for people who are ready for it. So our mission at New St. Andrews is to train leaders who can shape culture under the lordship of Jesus Christ. And so we don't expect everybody's going to come here. Lots of people shouldn't come here if they're not ready to work and to learn and to grow. They shouldn't come here. It's a challenging environment. And I think classical colleges should be that way. Not unreachable, not only like the top 3% are going to be here, but a challenging environment for an ambitious student. But at the earlier level, especially at the K-12 level, and not just in the classroom, actually one of the mistakes is thinking education is just in the classroom, right? The education is all of life, for all of life. And that's where Christians have a leg up and an opportunity to as we try to rebuild the Christian culture, and then eventually rebuild Christendom. We have a leg up in that we already value our kids loving God, right? We want to do that. And so now we can think about their whole life from birth until launch and beyond as one which is going to shape their souls. Right? And think about the effect on the soul, and not just reduce education to, did they learn these 5 things? Do they have these 5 facts, and can they get a job? But have they grown into the kind of Christian men and women with the character of Christian men and women that they should have? And so, entrepreneurial about the educational enterprise. Yes. I think that's been one of the benefits of the homeschooling movement, is it's forced people to reconsider what we're valuing in education, and having some brave souls willing to opt out altogether. It's not the only way to do it. Obviously, Christian schools are extremely valuable as well in lots of circumstances. So those are the 2 ways. I think a danger for our classical schools is going to be down the road. Well, even right now, it's already happening. That the lure of prestige will lure them away from the character formation they should be focused on. And so if you decide actually the public schools aren't getting kids into elite colleges, so our private, we'll start a classical Christian school, and then they'll be super smart, and then they'll get into the elite colleges. That would be a failure as a movement, and it'd be forgetting the goals with which we started. And it's the souls of our kids that are the primary goals. That's the primary goal of the educational enterprise. And so to have activities that produce that, right? So if you can't train character just in a classroom, you have to train it in life. You have to have, a life for young people where they learn to exercise those virtues, to acquire them and exercise them. And so we definitely have to rethink how we're doing a lot of different things in education. Having apprenticeships where they can work with adults in healthy ways, like we talked about with the business side, that's part of it. Just not sitting in a classroom so many hours a week, I think, is part of it. I've had debates with some folks here about that, but I don't know that 35 hours in a classroom is good for almost anybody at any age, really, for years and years on end. I think especially for young boys, that's pretty crippling. That's pretty hard. I've talked to some folks here who are like, no, but young boys need discipline. They have to learn self-control, and to do that, I appreciate that point. But I don't see for myself making my son sit in a classroom for 35 hours a week. I just don't think that's healthy. Now, if they're video gaming for the remaining time, that's not healthy either. If they're learning laziness, that's not healthy either. And that's often a challenge for the homeschoolers, right? As they end up in the middle and later years, not actually pushing their boys in a very productive and healthy way to grow into manhood the way that they need to be. So that's something that the homeschoolers need to keep thinking through and being careful about what they're doing there, whether it's just through a part-time job where they learn the rubbing shoulders with men that you trust, obviously, to help you with the parenting enterprise, or if it's other kinds of jobs related to the household. If you have a family farm or something like that, or a little hobby farm even, there can be lots of jobs, work that they can do related to that is very productive. So that's the challenge for the parents, homeschooling parents there. But taking it seriously, and like you said, being willing to say what we're doing is not working. Our kids are becoming lazy. Let's fix this. Our kids aren't compassionate. Let's fix this. Our kids aren't ambitious enough. Okay, let's fix this, right? Modern education is very mediocre. You learn nothing more than nothing more than mediocrity from the way we do things. So sometimes it is we have to aim higher, right? There's a lot of cool stuff we could do. Why are we doing lame stuff? Let's do great stuff. So
at the beginning we were kind of talking about, there's been the modernist movement, and there's been kind of the fruits that we've seen in various areas, even going back to gender or egalitarianism and such. But then there's also been this resurgence of, in recent years, classical education, these kind of things that you're talking about were not being talked about so much 15, 20 years ago. A lot of people are starting to talk about this and to start to be entrepreneurial, or just try to be ambitious above mediocrity on bringing these things back. you see this taking place in the church to some degree, but certainly in specific churches that are kind of latching onto this. Universities like New St. Andrews, Luther Classical College, and there's others, Hillsdale, et cetera. Where do you see this going over the next 10 to 20 years, especially as you start to see the first fruits of men starting to come back? But so there's a lot of tension, but where do you see us going here?
That's a great question, because it's often very hard to predict the future and to look into the future. When you're in a situation, it's often hard to think about how it could look very different down the road. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people that have made predictions for the last 30 years in a lot of areas of American life have been obviously wrong and made a lot of mistakes. And so I've been hesitant for a long time to do any kind of predicting. It's a wild world. Just go do your stuff and trust God for the results. And I still think that's good advice. I do think, though, we can see at this point that this renewed thing, classical education, has real legs, that it's obviously, for all of its infancy that it's still in. I actually think classical education in the 21st century is in its infancy stage. Mm-hmm. It's in the startup phase of the business cycle. There's a lot of growth to happen, a lot of innovative transformation to happen. I'm not assuming we're going to do things here exactly the same in 10 years as we're doing it now, because I think we're going to keep getting better at what we're doing, and we're gonna be able to do it differently and even better in the future. But at the macro level, I think we are at a kind of tipping point where it's clear that this movement has legs. It's going to keep going. It's not going to crash and burn anytime soon. Everything else is crashing and burning way quicker than anything going on in classical education. So it's got wheels. And, my vocation is in higher education. I've been a college professor ever since finishing grad school. And I do think we're on the cusp of seeing a lot more new institutions of higher learning and seeing renewal in really good ways of some existing ones. Because the legacy institutions are closing. Christian schools, especially secular schools, secular colleges, they're in really bad shape. Actually, they're closing quickly too. But a great many Christian colleges are also on the decline. There's some Christian schools that are doing fine. Again, because the secular schools are so bad, mm-hmm. that even the Christian school, which is just kind of a copy of the secular school, but at least has some Jesus in it, is educationally considered worth it. And so I wish a lot more of these Christian schools had a lot more Jesus in it, but that's another discussion. But I think educationally, most of these schools don't look very different. The Christian schools don't look very different from their secular counterparts. And for the most part, that's turning out to be, I think, a failed system. It's not good job training. It's extremely expensive. It's not good for the character of young people, right? It's a joke today that kids are crazy in college. It's not a place where you learn to be diligent, where you learn to work hard, where you learn to be temperate and self-controlled. That's not really what we associate with college today. Mm-hmm. So those are declining, but I think we are at a point where we're going to see new classical colleges being formed. And I've actually started telling people, I think by 2030, there'll be a classical college in every state in the country. Right now, you're like, well, there's this one school in Wyoming. It's not going to stay that way. I don't think. This is my prediction. Because not everybody wants to send their kid to Wyoming. Mm-hmm. We're in Idaho. You've experienced just a little bit here. We had the farmers market this morning. We're taping on a Saturday. Beautiful farmers market. It's an amazing town. Like, I would have gone here for college. I went to a small town for college. I liked it. But there's a lot of people that don't want to send their kids a long way away to school. If they're going to get awesome stuff and bring it back, then yeah, you'll send them. But if you feel like they're going to get awesome stuff and never come back, you're less comfortable with that. Mm-hmm. And a lot of kids don't want to do that either. And most kids go to school within 6 hours of where they live to college, if they go to college. And when you just look at the geographic distribution of the U.S., I just think we're going to have a lot of new classical colleges. I think they're going to start very organically in lots of different ways. Sometimes it'll be a church. Sometimes it'll be whatever the flagship K-12 classical school is. I think they'd be crazy not to think about starting a college. They're starting to graduate more and more seniors. There's probably not anywhere around them that those seniors can continue that kind of education at the collegiate level. And, it's not easy to start a college. It's also not rocket science if you have a few solid people and a couple guys with master's degrees and pastors with MDivs, and you can start on a shoestring, right? So that entrepreneurial spirit, I think we're going to see people try it. So I know of, a handful that are going on right now. New College Franklin in Tennessee has been around for a while. They're a reform school. Trinity College in Louisville is an independent school that started up on a very classical model, really modeled on Bethlehem College in Minneapolis. Bethlehem College being another small classical school.
I didn't know they were classical.
Well, they don't say that.
Yeah.
Just look at their curriculum and then you tell me what it is.
Interesting. Okay.
Super classical.
Because they're like 35, 40 minutes from me. Yeah.
Yeah. Bethlehem College has an extremely classical curriculum. Maybe not doing everything the way that certain classical people think it should be done, but compare what they're doing with what other Christian colleges around you are doing, like Bethel or Northwestern. Look at the curriculum. It's night and day, night and day. And so I think there'll be something like that in maybe every state's a little ambitious. I just think they're going to keep popping up because people want to go to school within 4 or 5 hours of where they live. Most kids are going to do that. And why send them? Why send them further out? So there will be entrepreneurial people and entrepreneurial men in different places that will say, let's build it. We've already got a big K-12 that's healthy. We have a partnership of churches in the region that wants this, and they'll start it. So I think we're on the cusp of seeing some renewal. I do think it'll be interesting to see the legacy institutions, how many of them can turn it around and how many of them just collapse. We'll have to see. It would be possible to start schools too soon, when you're not ready for it and there's not enough demand. But I think we'll see a whole network of these schools in the upcoming years. That's my prediction on the higher ed scene. I certainly hope it'll be that way.
And then there's the ripple effect from that. If you're graduating 10,000 kids a year with a strong Christian, classical, really polished Christian worldview.
Oh, that would be huge.
Launching them out.
That would be absolutely huge.
Families and help churches.
Yeah. And help churches, help communities, help businesses. That would be absolutely massive. Yeah.
Well, I think we're probably running up on time here. We have another interview in 9 minutes.
Okay.
Goodness.
Very good.
So, Dr. David Talcott, this was excellent. I appreciate your time and appreciate all that you're doing here at NSA.
Yeah. Thank you so much. If people want to reach out to me, they're welcome to. I have a very eclectic Twitter account, which is Talcott NYC, if they want to follow me there, since I used to teach in New York. I've kept that. I haven't changed the Twitter handle yet. Haven't brought myself to do that. And thanks very much.
Yeah. And is your email on the website here?
Probably, yes. On the New St. Andrews College, so nsa.edu.
Okay.
They can go to my faculty page there and get me there.
Okay. Perfect.
Yep.
Thank you. God bless and cheers.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.